Alright everybody, we're back with this 300 two-wheel drive that we were trying to put a top end on. And so we found that the crank bearing has been spun in the case, and it now slides back and forth in the case, which it should not do. Okay, it's time to see about getting the engine out of this thing. I'm hoping I can just pop the axle out without having to pull the A-arms and everything. The top A-arm's loose at the top, so the hub will fold over towards me. If the axle will pull out, then the whole rear suspension will be free of the engine. I may have to move the shock to get the engine mount bolts out of the back, but that's not too big a deal. I can just take it loose on one end. But basically, I'm going to try to do that, and I'll have to get my shift linkages off. And maybe an electrical connector for the neutral safety switch, a couple minor things, but I'm hoping it's not too much trouble, everything comes apart okay. So this is probably going to be mostly time lapse, so I'll get it set up and see what I can do here. Okay, the axle popped right out without much trouble. Now I'm on to the shift linkages. This one has a little mark right here above my finger. I don't know, it's down a couple teeth from this slot. The one in the back, the mark lines up with the slot. Hard to see, but anyway, I'm gonna try to get those loose now. Okay, all the shift linkages off. There's just 3 bolts to hold that bracket on, and then 2 bolts for the spline levers. And I've got the starter wiring, the neutral safety switch, voltage regulator, all that wiring is loose. There's a crankcase vent tube. Right behind that bracket. I have to get it loose. I won't be able to show it. And then we'll move around to the other side, and once everything is loose, we can try to get these frame bolts out and walk it back. So I'm over on the right hand side now. I pulled the axle out the same way. Just took this upper A-arm loose and put some pressure on the axle cup and got it to pop out. The brake caliper has a T30. The hose does, it's mounted here, and 2 10mm bolts to mount the caliper to the hub. I just took them loose and set it up there. There's a ground right here. I'll go ahead and take that loose. Get it out of the way and put my bolt back in to kind of keep track of them better. And then there's an oil cooler line here, and there's one here, and they're pretty simple to get off. This one actually has a cut here where it's been rubbing this, so I'll probably replace that. At least I think it's a cut. It's hard to tell, but once I get the engine out, I'll be able to see. So basically, So just be able to take my pliers, pull that back. It's fighting me a little bit. There we go. Alright. That one's off. I'm gonna do the same thing. Do the same thing with the other one in the front. And unless I find something else, I think that's about it before we can start pulling the engine subframe bolts out. So I'll get this off and get back with you. Okay, I just did a little time lapse there, but here's the engine and transaxle assembly all out in one unit. And it came out pretty easy, really. There's a bolt here on each side, and then these 4 bolts that made up with a plate on the ATV. And once you get all your hoses and wires loose, it pretty much just slides out the back. It's amazing how light the 4-wheeler is with no rear end under it. But came out pretty easy, so now I can get on to probably splitting the cases on this, unless I decide to just throw my other engine in it. So, and of course I still got that going on, so we'll get to it here. Okay, I've kind of reassembled the engine out of this machine just to keep it all together and keep water out of it, since it's probably just going to be sitting now. This is the machine that I've pulled the engine out of. This one could have been okay, it just needed a fair amount of work. It did run pretty good, no smoke, so this is going to be the engine that's going in that machine, the one we've been working on. Okay, I skipped a few steps. Went ahead and got it all back together, got the clutch housing bolted back on. Luckily the gasket didn't tear, so it was okay. Went ahead and got all 3 engine mount bolts back in, got the rear suspension all bolted back up. I think what I'm going to do now is cover any holes and take it and pressure wash it, because it's pretty dirty. It would be nice if it was cleaned up a little. The suspension too. Okay, I'm done pressure washing this thing. It still looks pretty dirty there, but that stuff's kind of baked on. I'm not worried about it being spotless, but the suspension and stuff looks way better. And I'll probably hit some of it with some spray paint, and that'll spiff it up enough to look pretty decent. So I've just got it sitting outside to dry now. After it's out here a few hours, I'll pull it in and paint it, and it'll be ready to go back under the machine. Alright, well, I'm not much of a painter, and honestly I usually like stuff looking original more so than I do like somebody has painted it up. But there's some overspray. Somebody had painted the engine some before, or painted the subframe that it was in and got some paint on it, but I just touched it up with some black, gloss black that I had laying around, and I do think it looks better. The axles were kind of rusty, and I've just hit them a little bit. And I know the sun makes it hard to see, but I do think it looks better. So I think I'm gonna stick it back in the machine now, and hopefully we can get it running. Alright, well that wasn't too bad. I just had to get everything lined up. But it started in there easier than I expected it might for me working by myself. But there everything is all painted up and it's stuck back in there, so I should be able to get everything back on it and change the oil. Get all my connections and things back on, and I should be good to go. I'm definitely going to have to clean up the rest of this thing and probably hit it with some spray paint since the rear looks good and the rest of it's a little bit, well, most of it's just dirty, but it could use a little sprucing up. So I might shoot some paint on some of the other exposed frame areas. But glad to have the engine back in, so now I can finish up hooking everything up and we'll do a test fire on it and make sure it runs okay. Alright, everything's in and buttoned up. You can see the oil level. I changed the oil and filter. And I think I've got everything hooked up. I probably need to zip tie a few things out of the way, and I'm not done, but I should have it hooked up where everything will function, start and run. So I'm gonna set this camera up and hopefully this thing fires right off. Well, we gotta take it for a drive now, I guess. runs. Okay, I've been painting on the frame a little bit. Probably do this front bumper after I'll probably take it off at some point, but I'm no painter. I stopped up here. I don't want to get into the plastic area. Once the side covers are on, that'll all be covered. It's not super pretty, but it looks better. Battery box looks a lot better. It was kind of rough. The engine already had some paint on it, so wasn't overly concerned about a little overspray on the engine. Like I said, I'm not a painter. I do think it looks better though. On to the next project, or part of this project I should say.